Good Tuesday evening, aviation enthusiasts. The ambassadors are back for yet another episode here on, what is it, November 7th? 9th. It's the 9th, 2 extra days. November 9th, 2021, to talk about whatever you want. Of course, Pat Brown over there in Texas, wave Pat so we can tell which one is you. And then Kay Sunrum and wave Kay so we know which one is, there you go. Kay's over in San Diego. I'm Jamie Beckett in Florida. And of course, none of this would be happening without the skills and talent of our phenomenal producer, Donnie McKay. Donnie, don't wave. It's okay. We're going to be talking tonight about Class Bravo airspace. We've talked about non-towered airports. We've talked about how to conduct yourself at towered airports. Now we're ready to go for the big dog, Class Bravo. And of course, as always, while we're going to be talking about a specific topic, you can ask us questions in the comments anywhere you want. So feel free on any topic at all. Go ahead and chime in and let us know how we can help you. And the ambassadors are now on duty. Now, Pat, you've got Bravo airspace near you, don't you?
That's right. We got a lot of it. Sure do.
Well, yours is kind of unique in Houston, Texas. What's special about it that maybe people who have seen the generic version in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge would find a little daunting about Houston's Class Bravo?
Well, I mean, I don't think it's particularly daunting, but I live here and I work around it. I think Kay's daunting, but out in the LA area. But we have two major airports in the city of Houston. We have George Bush up in the north, and we have Hobby down to the south. And we've got Class Bravo, which surrounds both of them in kind of a loose, kind of almost kind of the shape of an 8 almost. And in between those two airports is I-10. And if you want to transition between those, between the east and west side of Houston, then you're going to be going through the I-10 corridor. We can talk a little bit more about that. But other than that, they go up to 10,000 feet, which is most Class Bravos go up to 10,000, although there are certainly some exceptions. And we have a Mode C/ADSB veil. That's new. A Mode C veil is old, but the /ADSB addition to that on the VFR charts is somewhat new. So,
well, I got to admit, you were very helpful to me when I was out there, because I have never flown in a place where two Bravos overlap. And it was really helpful to have you pointing out that little narrow sliver of asphalt known as I-10, I think it's only like 16 lanes wide, so you can barely see it from 1,500 feet.
Yeah, it's 19, but who's counting?
It's actually great. I mean, it really was helpful. Now, Kay, as Pat said, you have Bravo out where you are, but yours really proves the rule that no two Bravos are the same. Yours may be in San Diego, down Southern California. You may have the weirdest looking Bravo airspace I have ever seen in my life.
Well, Southern California is very busy, right? There's lots of pilots and lots of airports. And we also have the terrain and the ocean on one side, another country down south of us, and military airspace. And so it's pretty hard to have a concentric circle looking Class Bravo here, particularly with all the airports. And even though we teach that, yeah, Bravo is typically like an upside down cake, right? It's the surface in the center, but in this example, it's like the cake was smeared onto a table or something like that. It looks nothing like the concentric circles. And you just have to learn what those rules are to get in and out of airports. And there's a lot of checkpoints and landmarks that will help you along the way. And it's a matter of practicing. But the key really is to just sit on the ground with the terminal area chart and look at those checkpoints first and really get familiar with the landmarks, because it's going to be hard to find them up in the air, and try not to get into different airspace, whether it's the Bravo airspace or the military or terrain. Any of those things can get you if you don't know exactly where you are. So it's about situational awareness and knowing what those ground reference points are ahead of time. Then it actually becomes quite easy. And some of the most wonderful airports that I've been to are right in the shelf of Class Bravo here in Southern California. And I would hate to see people not want to go there because they're afraid of it, or afraid that they're going to get in trouble. And so the key is just to learn that information on the ground and go fly with the CFI and And then it is not as daunting. It becomes fun. I actually love this area here. And the airspace is no longer intimidating as it was the very first time when I came out here.
Yeah, here in Central Florida, we have three Bravos in Florida. We have Orlando, Tampa, and Miami. But Orlando and Tampa are actually fairly close to each other. They don't touch. The airspace doesn't touch. There's a little channel between them, and I happen to live where that channel is. But I think I was actually lucky, looking back, that I learned to fly at a Delta airport that the Bravo overlaid it, so that by the time you get to 1,600 feet, you were in the Bravo. So just from the time I was a private applicant, that was a common thing, and I got used to it. And as you say, Kay, the great thing about it, it's not really the primary airport that we're concerned with primarily. See, I used the same word twice. That's bad grammatically, but anyhow, there's all those other airports, towered and non-towered airports, that underlie that Bravo, and people can become intimidated. And it's not just San Diego and Houston and Orlando; it's Chicago and New York and Boston and St. Louis, and they're all over the country. There's a bunch of them. But it's just controlled airspace. We don't have to be that freaked out by it. There is a method of getting in and out. And speaking of primary airports, Kay, you actually have landed at the primary airport in the center of the Bravo, haven't you?
I have in San Diego and I should include Los Angeles because I almost feel like that's part of my dual, I could say, Bravo, even though there's quite a bit of space in between the two. Yes, I landed the 172 at Lindbergh. Actually, I first did it at Los Angeles right after the pandemic hit. I mean, it was empty after all. There were no flights going in and out, and I thought, well, you know what? I want to check that box off. I have this map. It's in the other room, aeronautical map of all the airports I've been to here in California, and now I can say in Southern California, with exception to the military airports, I've been to pretty much all of them. And not
That
the
is
private
so
ones.
cool.
Now it's taken me 2 decades to do that. Okay, so but I took that opportunity, and yes, it was actually a piece of cake. Fly over LAX all the time, going through the various transition routes, and I always wondered, well, I wonder how it'd be to land this little airplane there, and I got a chance to do that, and it was a piece of cake.
Yeah, I mean, that's the great thing. And it became a thing on social media during COVID because, as you said, so much of commercial aviation was curtailed. Suddenly, those primary airports weren't all that busy, and people did start flying in Cherokees and 172s and things thinking, hey, I've never been there. It'd be an interesting thing to land on a 12,000-foot long runway. But any special things like that during all this weird time in Texas, Pat? I mean, any of your buddies or you decided I'm going to go land at Hobby or Bush just to have the experience?
Well, Hobby's not that big a deal because there's a mix of interesting mix of all kinds of GA traffic and airline stuff there. Intercontinental's a little bit different than that. Donnie, I don't know if you've got that picture that I sent you the other day that I think is kind of an interesting one to throw up here if we can get it up. Yeah, I've gone into Intercontinental Airport several times. Most recently was about actually it was before the pandemic, right when they were under their normal operations. But I'm not sure I hearing some weird noises in the background there. But I've got a picture of me and our little yellow Cessna 152 in the shadow of a 777 that somebody was kind enough to take and send to me. So if we can find it, we'll put it up here.
That point, though, about Hobby being a diverse group of aircraft, that kind of goes to our point that people can go there. I mean, there's a large group of people, whether they're flying a Cirrus or a Bonanza or a TBM or Citation Jet or whatever. There are these airports where we can all get in there and use them. Is there a time, Kay, when it's wise to avoid that primary airport or even getting close to that primary airport?
It's during the real busy times. It's important to know what the arrival procedures and the departure procedures are. And if you don't think that you know how to navigate that area, particularly during those rush periods, then I would suggest to, find an alternate way. because what you don't want to do is find yourself caught in the middle of all this traffic, and maybe you just don't know what that procedure is, and then you find yourself stumbling. And so weather is also another consideration. For in my area, when the winds are coming from the west, then you have certain transition routes that you're allowed to go through. But if they're from the east, those transition routes are not available to you. So you need to know that, and that's all tied to the flow of traffic into LAX. So if the winds are coming from eastbound, then a couple of those routes are not allowed anymore. And so those are the things that you need to be aware of.
Pat, we talk a lot about Bravo Airspace in Rusty pilot programs. Kay, you teach them as well. We all get into that. And we do put a fair amount of effort into explaining it's just controlled airspace. It's no big deal, but it's just controlled airspace. What would if you're in the airplane with a student and you're going to be flying into Bravo for the first time, what's your conversation like?
Were you asking me, Jamie?
I was asking Pat, but I can ask you. Go ahead.
Pat.
Well, so we're talking about going into Bravo for the first time.
Yeah.
Well, we'll have a conversation about it before we get it in the airplane, because as we've talked before, the cockpit's not a great place to learn or to try to teach in. But we'll have a conversation. But you're going to call up, and I'm assuming that we're outside of Bravo, we're going to fly into it. So we're going to have a conversation about calling up approach control several miles before we actually get to the outer border of Class Bravo airspace, or whatever level of the airspace we're at before we penetrate it. And we're going to tell them who we are, where we are, and what we want to do. And they'll come back. Theoretically, they'll come back and they'll give us. They will certainly give us a squawk code, and then. And we should be able to hear the words cleared into Class Bravo airspace or cleared into B. Class B, you'll hear a couple of different versions of that, but basically you have to hear the words, you're cleared into Bravo. And then you do what you're told to do when you're inside the Bravo airspace. It's really that simple.
Kay, one of the things I bump into a lot here in Florida is people who want to go to an airport near where they would be, near that Bravo primary airport. Well, let's use an example of Kissimmee, which we all talk about in Rusty Pilots. Kissimmee is a Delta airport, but the Bravo starts at 1,600 feet there and goes up. I'm not a huge fan of trying to run under the Bravo. I would rather do it the way we do it in the Rusty Pilot, and that's the way I do it. If I go to Orlando Exec or whatever, I just call up and get a clearance into the Bravo and vector in. I'm not a big fan of being low because I don't think it's a whole lot different than scud running. There's things sticking up out of the ground. You're in a very mountainous place. What's your thoughts on when you're going to an airport other than the primary? Do you like being in the Bravo on your way, or is it reasonable to scoot under it and try and not talk on the radio?
Now, I personally always like to get Class Bravo clearance, rather than trying to avoid that airspace, just like flight following. They're there to help us, right? And getting a Class Bravo is really not that big of a deal. We talk about that in the Rusty Pilots, not just for Rusty pilots, but also even current pilots who are not used to flying in busy airspace. And so we talk about, well, what is the clearance going to look like and what do you need to do? And so my preference is to get that Class Bravo, because then you don't have to follow you don't have to worry, about the shelves and when to turn, when not to turn. Now, when the Bravo is a set of concentric circles, the upside down cake, it's a lot easier to know, okay, I'm this distance, this radius from the center, so I know what airspace I should be in. But if you're in Southern California, again, we don't have those kind of circles. And so it's really hard to tell, well, am I in this particular awkward shaped triangle, or am I in that one? And so by having a clearance, you don't have to worry about all of that. And the other piece is it'll probably be a lot faster to get the clearance rather than trying to navigate around and stay out of all that airspace. There's really no need to do that unless they are really busy and they cannot accommodate you, or you have to climb really high and you get navigated all around. Then you might want to try to go under the shelf. So it really depends on your experience level and are you in a rush?
Pat, how about let's go to a pro for this, because you're the smartest guy on this broadcast. I mean, because the other one is a woman and I'm just me. But if If a student pilot wants to go into a Bravo or a sport pilot wants to go into a Bravo, can they do that, or do you have to be private pilot or above?
No, I just have to have an appropriate endorsement to be able to do that. You have to receive training in order to be able to do it. Again, it's not difficult to do. You just have to have the appropriate training to do that, and the appropriate endorsement in your logbook, and then go right ahead. It's no problem whatsoever.
Excellent. Let's call on Donnie here to give us a little bit of the freak out factor where people worry. Donnie, can we see that image of the Washington, D.C. Bravo? And sorry, yeah, that's a pretty complex looking space. And if you're a relatively inexperienced pilot, and no issues with that, we all started out as an inexperienced pilot, that's a little freaky looking. Donnie, can you overlay the special flight rules area on that? Suddenly that got a whole lot more intimidating. And I think we have to remember, thank you, Donnie, I appreciate it. I think we all have to remember that to the low-time pilot, the student pilot, the pilot who lives in a rural place who has not dealt with Bravo airspace, they all look like vociferous up there. So I think we have to sometimes, and I don't mean just the three of us, I mean CFIs as a rule, we have to encourage people. It's just controlled airspace. There's nothing magical or heavy-handed about it. As you say, Pat, you've got to have the equipment, two-way radio, mode C transponder. You've got to have ADS-B out. Nobody cares about in except us. Yep. And you've got to hear the word clearance. But beyond that, Pat, it's actually a lot easier to fly inside Bravo airspace than it is to fly in Echo or Golf where nobody's controlling anything, isn't it?
Oh, I think so, particularly around here. And again, I mean, most of my flying is in the majority of my flying is in Texas, so I'm quite familiar with the Dallas class Delta and the Houston area class Delta. And these controllers that we have here are just superb. And I've never been denied flight following when I've asked for flight following, and no matter how busy the airline, they may say stand by or call me back in 5 minutes, but I've never been denied flight following. This is the picture that I was talking about earlier. This is me in a Cessna 152 taxiing out to the ramp behind that 777 at Intercontinental Airport. This is about, that was about 2 years ago, just before the pandemic. There was an open house. It was it was Intercontinental Airport 50th anniversary. And I was invited to come up there and do a presentation on behalf of AOPA. And I decided I would fly Woodstock, which is what I call that little yellow Cessna 152. And taxiing out, a friend of mine caught us taxiing out behind that 777, and it just, it was an interesting experience. It was about a 25-minute taxi over to the runway that we had to take to get out of there. I could have driven quicker.
I was going to ask, how did you take that picture, Pat?
Yeah, it was a long selfie stick, Kay, a long selfie stick. No, I could have driven home quicker than that, just the taxi alone. But hey, you know something? It was great fun. And Bernard C. is saying, caution, wake turbulence. That's wake turbulence when you're on the ground in a 152.
I had that experience in Lakeland once. I got cleared to taxi. There was a transport category aircraft down at the Hold Short Line. And because he had a IFR clearance and stuff going on, they cleared me to taxi past him because I was little enough that I could. And it was kind of funny because as I taxied past, the captain called and said, "Hey, is that AOPA airplane?" I got a huge kick out of that.
A lot of people ask me, did I win the airplane?
Yeah.
Are you the winner of the airplane?
Yeah.
Well, hey, Kay, let's Donnie, do you have a picture or a graphic of the San Diego class Bravo? Because we've talked about it being kind of weird, but can we see an image?
Photo number, so this one is for San Diego in the south there, and you can see the Los Angeles area up north. It almost looks like it's one big area, but there's two class Bravos. And if we look at the second one, Donnie, if you can put that one up, that's just the Los Angeles class Bravo here. Mm-hmm. And Yes, it looks really cluttered because there's a lot of airspace, and you see all that yellow that's the yellow LA basin. The next image, what I did is I highlighted the class Bravo. So this is a lot more helpful to me, and this is just clicking a button on the app, and it'll highlight the shelves of the Bravo. It's a lot easier to see. But if you look down at the bottom, there's different transition routes right above the little pencil that says scratch pad. Don't know if you can see that in the box. It says the Hollywood route, and then you'll see these arrows that go almost from the southeast to the northeast. So that's just one of the 5 transition routes that they have. And this is what I was saying before. You need to know how to navigate through this airspace. Unlike other parts of the country, here in Los Angeles area, you need to tell the controller how you're going to navigate. They will just simply ask you, how do you plan to navigate through the Los Angeles class Bravo? And it's a question to you. And then it's upon you to tell them, I want to go through the Hollywood route or the Coliseum route. There's a mini route and a coastal route, and then there's a regular flights rules area. So there's 5 different ways. And if you're not familiar with this on the ground ahead of time, you can't expect the controller to tell you what to do, unlike in other places where they just give you the headings and they give you altitudes. Here, they expect you to know which of those 5 ways are you going to transition. And this is for VFR, not IFR. And so I'll go just a tiny little bit more, and then I'll stop here. If we look at, Donnie, could you put up the Hollywood transitions, since I was just talking about that? This is on your terminal area chart. This is one of those 5 transition routes. So you need to know the details here. And this is actually pretty simple. If you're coming from the south, you start off near Queen Mary, which you'll be able to see that ship really well. And then you proceed towards LAX. You're right east of the runway there. And then you proceed northbound, and it gives you what the radial is and all of that. The altitude is 8,500 or 95, depending on the direction. So this is the detail that you have to have. But looking at this is pretty straightforward. It's really not a big deal, but you have to know how to do that. So this is unique to the LA area. The next one, do you have that one up, Donnie, the coastal? Here's another one. Whereas this one, the altitude is a little bit lower. And so if I'm going not that far and I'm staying within the LA basin, I prefer this route because I only have to be at 5,500, not 8,500. And sometimes the marine layer will come in and it's not going to be VFR anymore. So you can't do this route. This is where the weather will sometimes dictate which transition route you take. So we're not going to go through the rest of them, but this is where you need to sit with a CFI and go through those transitions, or else you're going to be asking the controller, well, give me the clearance, and they're going to come back and say, how do you plan to navigate the class Bravo? And then they'll tell you to stay out, or you have to climb above 10,000 feet to get over if you don't know those transition routes.
Yeah, and I think the interesting.
Go ahead, Pat.
I was going to say, I think the interesting thing too is that if any of our listeners aren't used to flying in Class Bravo airspace, there's a terminal area or terminal chart on that's basically an exploded version of the sectional, and on the back side of that chart is where you're going to find the illustration, that most recent illustration that was almost kind of a monochrome or black and white type thing with just the magenta little arrows on there. That's going to be on the backside of the TAC. We have the same thing here in Houston. We don't have VFR transition routes here in Houston. We have VFR Flyways, 2 different things. The VFR Flyways are more of suggested ways. They're not mandatory in any way, shape, or form. The air traffic controllers don't insist that you know any of. They don't have names. They're just kind of blue arrows that kind of suggest you want to be going this direction at this altitude or that direction at a certain altitude. But unlike your transition routes out there, they're not mandatory, but they're on the backside of the terminal area chart too.
And if you're using a device with one of the aviation apps, it'll be in your document section.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you would find them. And so take a look at those before you start that flight.
And to Kay's point earlier about working with CFIs, Pat, I wouldn't want to leave the impression with someone that the best way to get in and out of a Bravo is to sit down at your kitchen table and plan it out and then do it for the first time on your own. It really is worth flying with a CFI or an experienced pilot who's done this a bit and get a sense of what's the flow, because it can be, the radio chatter alone can be very daunting for somebody who's not experienced to that level of chatter. And even the number of other aircraft you see in the vicinity can be a high number, or on your ADSB, if you have ADSB in. If you're from way out in the hinterland, all of a sudden, this might seem tough, but working with a CFI, working with an experienced pilot who's done this actually is a pretty good way to get introduced rather than just try and figure it out on your own. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I have actually, I've been called a number of times over the last several years, especially from people that are based at non-towered fields well outside of our area here, 40, 50 miles away, who want to fly through the corridor to get to the east side of town from the west side of town. And, or excuse me, from the west side of town to the east side of town. And they'll call me and say, would you just fly that route with me a couple of times? Let's go over Circle of Monument, the San Jacinto Monument, and come back or something like that, just to get a feel for flying through Class Bravo. And once we've done it over and back, our airspace is not that complicated at all. Certainly not in comparison to K's.
Steve Richardson, and I have been remiss in my duties as moderator. I haven't said hi to Bernard C. or Russell Warman, and I'm sorry about that. But Steve Richardson says, the three of you added together, what's it like to have 120 years of experience? Well, my 120 years has been really interesting. I got to tell you, I don't know about the other two, but I've enjoyed the heck out of a century and 20% more of flying.
I want to ask Steve, how old do you think I am? No,
Yeah.
let me answer that question.
Do we really look that old?
Don't ask that question. I don't want to know the answer to that question, Pat. Hey, let's you bring up a point, Pat, about flying with people in the area. I've been doing this for a good long while. As Steve Richardson says, 120 years I've been flying. I remember teaching Warbler and Orville how to carve that propeller, and man, those guys needed some assistance. But I was really a bit confused by flying through the Bravo, and I fly in and around Bravos frequently because of where I live in Central Florida. But yours is different, and Kay's is different. And if I was to go to Kay's area, I would do exactly what I did with you. We'd sit down at the FBO and talk about what's the route out of here, and having that insight, even as an experienced pilot, having that insight of this is how we like to see it done here is important, because while Bravo has basic rules that apply to all of them, the landmarks, the methodology of getting in, like Kay has those transition routes. It really is worth talking to the locals, and there is nothing embarrassing about it. There's nothing that says, hey, I'm not really that good, I need help. No, we all need that. Would you agree, Pat?
Yeah, I was in Vegas. It's probably been 10 years ago or so. And the Hoover Dam's not that very far from Vegas. And I just wanted to go do some sightseeing. So I called up a local flight school. I was a CFI at the time. I called up the local flight school and I just said, I'm here on business. I didn't identify myself as a CFI. I just said, I'm a pilot and I'm here on business and I've got a free afternoon. Do you have anybody that's available to maybe go fly with me? So do a little bit of sightseeing around the area. Fortunately, they did, and they had a free airplane, and we flew around Red Rocks Canyon, and we flew around over to the dam, and we came back around McCarran, the big airport down there. And I did all the flying, and the CFI was in the right seat, basically keeping me legal in doing all the radio work. And so I wasn't embarrassed at all to admit, look, I'm not qualified to do this without some sort of help and some sort of instruction. And, so yeah, just go for it.
I've got a really good question here from Christopher Ritchie, and it's not about Bravo Airspace, but that's okay because it's a great question. When would a temporary control tower pop up, and what are the circumstances for them to pop up? Wow. I know here they're most common if there's a fly-in at a non-towered airport that's expected to be fairly busy. there actually will be a pop-up tower, or used to be at one point. St. Augustine was a non-towered airport, but they also did maintenance on naval aircraft. And when they were testing Navy aircraft, there was a pop-up tower. Kay, do you have any experience with pop-up towers that just show up out of no place?
I was going to say the same thing. Most of the airports around here, when we do have any shows, they are at towered fields. But I've seen in other parts of the country, in non-towered fields, popping up just for a particular event.
Yeah, there's a really good example of that south of a little known place called Oshkosh. Fond du Lac has a pop-up tower every year. And if you don't read the NOTAMs and you're going to go into Fond du Lac, you're going to end up with a surprise. But yeah, that's a pop-up tower.
And Steve Richardson makes a valid and classic point about your pilot certificate. It's not a license, it's a certificate. It's really a license to learn. And it's true, that doesn't stop. And it kind of leads us into the next little facet of this I wanted to talk about. What if you make a mistake? What if you get cleared into the Bravo airspace and they tell you to turn, I don't know, 305 and you turn 350? Are they coming after you, Kay? Are you going to jail? Is your life over? You're going to lose your job and your apartment and your family's going to shun you? Or is there something somewhat less onerous that they're going to do?
No, it's okay. You know what? We've all made that mistake. And sometimes they'll tell you to turn to the right and you turn to the left because you think that that's closer or quicker. And maybe it is, but they still wanted you to turn to the right. We've all done that. But when you do bust some sort of reg, know about the NASA form, right? In fact, thank you, Martin. ASR, Aviation Safety Reporting System. Right. So some of us still carry that, the little form in our flight bag, but it's easier to do it online right now. And that basically just gives you an opportunity to disclose any error that you made. Hopefully it was unintentional, but whatever that error is, just disclose that. And when NASA gets that, they take all of that information and they do a wonderful job in analyzing mistakes. They'll strip away your personal data. And if there is any sort of enforcement action, you can say, hey, I filled out this ASR form. And so that goes a long way. It really is the FAA's way of trying to provide you a little bit of immunity here for self-disclosure, because self-disclosure of error goes a long way in order to make the NASA, National Airspace System, safer. And that's what it's about.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Pat.
The interesting thing about the NASA form or the ASRS that my buddy Martin Kastenbaum was sharp enough to put up there is you can fill out as many of them as you feel you need to. You should fill one out if you think you have had some sort of transgression. You go ahead and fill one out. It's no harm, no foul. You can fill out as many of them as you want, and I frankly encourage people to do it if they even think that they've made a mistake. You have 10 days from when you become aware of your mistake to do it, and if you have to use one, you can use what's kind of like defensive driving, except it's once every 5 years. So, with defensive driving in most states, if you get a traffic ticket, you can do defensive driving once every 2 years to get it expunged from your record. With the ASRS, it's the NASA form, it's once every 5 years. But again, feel free to fill them out as often as you can because it doesn't hurt. And the FAA does make changes to airspace or other procedures based on what they're hearing from people that are making these mistakes.
And also with ASRS, subscribe to their newsletter called Callback. You don't have to have submitted a form or anything like that. What they do is they compile that data and they put it together a newsletter of mistakes that pilots have made, and you can sort through whether it's pilots or mechanics, and you can get that information. We do learn a lot from other people's mistakes. Right. So subscribe to Callback.
There's one point too that we probably need to make, and I don't know that we've touched on it before it gets too much later in here. And that is, if you're cruising along, let's just say that you're cruising along under the shelf of a Class Bravo airspace, or even you're outside of Class Bravo airspace coming into an area that's underneath the Bravo airspace. You're talking to the controller, and the controller tells you to turn to a vector and perhaps fly an altitude that's going to put you into Class Bravo airspace. That is not an assumption that you're cleared into Class Bravo airspace. That will happen frequently, actually, here around Houston, depending on what direction you're coming in from. You'll be talking to a controller that tells you to turn to a particular heading and descend to an altitude at or below a certain altitude. And if you stay at the top of that at or below, it's going to put you into Class Bravo airspace. Well, and right about the time he tells you to do that, he's handing you off to another controller. That other controller might assume that you've gotten permission to go into Bravo, but no. You gotta, if you don't hear the words cleared into Bravo, it doesn't matter what the controller has told you to do if you haven't yet been cleared into Bravo.
That's a great point, Pat, because I see a lot of people here where they have established that two-way radio communication. That's okay for Class Charlie. Then you have that clearance as long as you establish two-way radio communication. But here in San Diego and LA, where they are on flight following and they're getting vectors, and as they approach the Bravo airspace, they have to remember, if they did not hear those magic words cleared into Class Bravo, then those vectors don't really mean anything. They don't mean that you can go in. You have to sometimes circle. And I've had to do that getting into the Los Angeles airspace. You'll circle around just south of Queen Mary until you hear those words, because they are really busy. They can only get you in certain times, so be careful with that.
And you do have to acknowledge that when the controller says you're cleared into Bravo, it's like any other clearance. You have to acknowledge that yes, I am cleared into Bravo. Click the mic, cleared into Bravo with your tail number, and then off you go.
Homer Talk has shared a comment saying, "Forgive me, controller, for I have strayed." There's a lot of truth in that. And I must admit, I'm very open about the mistakes I make, because I write, we do these things. I want people to learn from it. Making mistakes is normal. It's a human thing. It's not something we want to do. And as we were talking about before with the license to learn, you're constantly trying to get better, but we do make mistakes. And I will tell you, I busted the Bravo in Tampa a few years back. I had flown over to Tampa Executive, and it was just it was a clear morning, but with very low clouds. I mean, really thin, just a few at maybe 500 to 700 feet. When I came out, I was on a fairly short flight home, so I didn't get VFR flight following. I don't even think it was 30 miles. But the clouds had risen a bit, and my choice was to scud run under them, which I do not like, or to get on top of them and have good separation. So I chose the latter, and I got on top of them. And then as I was flying home, I dialed up the Lakeland Airport control tower just to get permission to transition the top of their delta. And when I called them, they came back with, "Let us know when you have time to copy down a number." And it turned out I had busted the edge of Class Bravo in Tampa on the outbound leg. I just completely spaced out that I was underneath the Bravo shelf. It's not that big a deal. I was flying a company airplane, so you have to call the chief of operations. But then you call the number they gave you, you explain the situation, and they were terrific and said, "We're not going to escalate this. This is fine." But I don't know if their boss is going to escalate it, so I do exactly what Kay says. I go onto the ASRS form, the Aviation Safety Reporting System, commonly called the NASA form. I download it, I fill it out, I mail it in. A week or two later, I get back a letter that has an ID number that pertains to that report. And basically you're telling them it was daytime, it was nighttime, it was a commercial flight, it was a recreational flight. These were the circumstances. Just be honest. Tell them what happened.
Yeah.
As long as it's not something malicious or habitual where you're just saying, "I can get away with this," you're probably in really good shape. And the system gets better, because if the pilot community feeds back honest information about how we made errors, how we caused a bit of a problem, they can design a better system that helps us avoid that in the future. So don't worry about it. I mean, don't shoot for it. Don't try to bust it. But if you do, it's not the end of the world. And Pat, I think that's one of the great misconceptions held over from the FAA of the 80s and 90s, where there were suspensions and revocations and all that sort of thing. People do have this fear that if I tell somebody I made a mistake, I'm in trouble. When the reality, we all make mistakes.
Yeah.
Just acknowledge it and learn from it, and off you go.
Yeah, I remember the first time of many that I've filled out some NASA forms. I remember the very first time I got the letter back with the information stripped out of it that's inside the letter. It's actually in a NASA envelope with a NASA, thing. I thought they had heard about my exploits and wanted me to be an astronaut, but that wasn't it. They were sending me back the idea at the top. So I was disappointed. I was disappointed. I've gotten over it, but one of these days Elon Musk is going to call me, though. I just know that.
I have faith in you. Hey, Danny Carson's got an interesting question that deserves some airspace here. Can you fly under the class Bravo without contacting them? Legally, yes, you can, because you're in either Gulf or Echo airspace. You don't have to be talking to anybody. But just because it's legal doesn't mean it's smart. Kay, I suspect out where you are, it's actually not a great idea in mountainous territory to be trying to scud run under the shelf. It's my assumption. Is that accurate?
You know what? It depends on which one of the airports, but sometimes you do need to do that. And I have a great example I'll share with you guys. Let's start with the San Diego class Bravo with the highlights. Donnie, if you can, I think it's number 7. If you can put that up. There you go. So the first one you just saw didn't have the highlights. And then the second one here, you can see the class Bravo highlighted. But if you're going from the north and look right at the center, you see Montgomery. That's MYF. And so that's almost the heart of the class Bravo, even though it's really San Diego International Airport that's south of that. But if you want to go there, you don't have to get a class Bravo. Say you're coming from Palomar from the north. You just need to know that you need to stay below 1,800 feet, because one of those triangles right there it starts at 1,800. And let's zoom in a little bit more. Could you put the one up for Montgomery? That's number 8. We zoom in there a little bit more. There we go. So if you're coming from the north, you would report under the Torrey Pines golf course. You can see the glider port there. You'll just come along the shoreline. Then you go down to Mount Soledad, and you would be talking to basically the tower at that time. You don't even have to get a Bravo clearance. You just have to stay under 1,800, and it's almost an extended downwind right into Montgomery, provided the winds are coming usually from the west. And so here's a situation where you don't need that class Bravo. It's actually a little bit faster, but sometimes if you get a class Bravo, you might get the same exact thing. Now, one thing to point out here is, hey, you say you need to go around, and it's a right pattern if you're on the northern runway, and look at the airspace directly north of Montgomery. It's Miramar. And so that starts at the surface. So you got to make your crosswind to downwind pretty tight. And there's a road right there. This is where it's important to know these landmarks. And so as long as you turn your right crosswind to downwind before that road, that'll keep you away from the Miramar airspace. Now, this is a typical example where people make a typical pattern, and they're turning crosswind, and there's a lot going on. They're climbing, and they climb right into Miramar airspace. So you got to kind of keep that tight. But yes, you absolutely can get into this airport without a Bravo clearance. You just need to know, well, what's the best way to do that? And this is where it's important to talk to the local pilots and say, how do most people come into Montgomery? And they'll tell you that it's if you're coming from the north, Torrey Pines, Mount Soledad, and then you're on an extended downwind. And there's different procedures for the different runways. So I wanted to point that out. Sometimes it's not practical to always expect a class Bravo airspace because they are really busy. But other times that's the safest way to do it because you don't have an option like the one that I just showed you. So
I'm going to say it really is a class Bravo dependent question, because it depends on the geography, it depends on the traffic flow, it depends on, is there a special event in the area where things are shifting around a bit? is the airport you're going to right near the primary where the shelf is maybe at 1,200 feet, or is it an outlying area where the shelf is 6,000 feet? So you've got to kind of weigh the situation. I do want to go to a great question from John Small, though. And Pat, I'm coming to you with this. Yeah. Can a private pilot acting as a sport pilot in an LSA, Interclass Bravo, without a CFI endorsement? This is a more complicated question than it appears to be. And I really like it, John. Thanks for sharing it. Because LSA is a somewhat nebulous term. While it means under 1,320 pounds, is that an Icon A5 with the glass panel and all the doodads? Or is that an Aranca Champ with no electrical system? So to some extent, it's the pilot certification. To some extent, it's the aircraft certification. To some extent, it's the aircraft itself. Pat, what do you think about this very interesting question?
Well, the answer to the very specific question there is yes. It is pretty simple. If you are a private pilot, even if you're operating under LSA rules, I'm talking about you're carrying a private pilot certificate in your pocket, but you're flying under LSA rules in an LSA aircraft, you're fine because you trained under private pilot rules. You hold the private pilot certificate, and you're perfectly okay to do all the things that you could normally do as a private pilot. That includes flying into Class Bravo airspace. Of course, there are some other limitations on sport pilot stuff. If you're flying under sport pilot rules without a medical and with your driver's license, in a light sport aircraft, you have to stay within sight of the ground at all times. You have to fly. You got to stay below 10,000 feet unless your unless your MSL altitude is over 10,000. You can go 2,000 above that. 2 seats, ground adjustable prop, all the things that 1,320 pounds or 1,430 if it's a seaplane. All those other things. But as far as airspace through which or into which you may fly, if you have a private pilot certificate, then you can go in all of them that you would have been able to fly into, even if you were flying under private pilot rules. I hope I didn't confuse too many people on that.
No, I think that was good. And the thing I was alluding to is you've got to be cognizant of the plane, because what you're talking about is absolutely true, Pat. Private flying under LSA, commercial flying under LSA, ATP flying as a sport pilot. You have that option, but you do have to remember the airplane. If you don't have an electrical system, you might have an issue going in there.
Well, except that aircraft that were certified without an engine-driven electrical system don't have to have a transponder. They don't have to have ADS-B. They don't have to any of that stuff. But that can impede whether or not you can actually go into Class Bravo airspace, which requires two-way radio communication and so on and so forth. So
it kind of goes to Ingram Leedy's question. And by the way, I personally know Ingram Leedy. I'm bragging about that. He's the coolest dude on the planet. Right there with Keith Richards. Ingram Leedy's something. Should you monitor or contact approach even if you're under the shelf? Now, this doesn't matter if you're in an LSA or anything else. I'm going to say, yes, you should absolutely monitor it. But I do. If I'm flying under the shelf, I ask for VFR flight following. For instance, if I'm leaving Winter Haven, center of the state, and going to Melbourne, I'm not going to enter the Bravo at all. But I will ask for VFR flight following, and they'll keep me at 2,500 feet or less going across that route because the airliners are coming over the top of me. So even though I'm under the shelf, I will ask for VFR flight following generally because there's other things happening in the airspace I'm not aware of, but they are, and ATC is going to keep me safe. Kay, what's your thought on this?
Yeah, I'd say it's a must. I mean, in this area, it is highly recommended. And in fact, they recently, all the airports have encouraged you to get a squawk code before you take off. And so that's sort of
clearance delivery
here. Yep, and it's not even from clearance delivery. There are some airports, it's the ground controller that just, even if there isn't a clearance delivery frequency, or it is a, just say an airport that very rarely do you have complicated takeoff procedures or anything like that. They still encourage you to get a squawk code, and that is simply because they want to know how who is in the system and who's going to be coming into the system. And if you're in the LA area, there are some airports where even if you don't ask for it, the tower will give you one because they want you to properly exit that airspace without getting into it. And this comes back to previous pilots violating nearby airport. Most of the time, it's controlled fields, and that is why they have this procedure in place. So
yeah, and you can get that squawk code. Most Class Delta airports, if with ground control, you can ask for that squawk code, or you can ask for VFR flight following before you take off. And typically on a Class Delta airport that doesn't have a clearance delivery, and many Class Deltas do not have clearance delivery, but all of them have ground control, and that's where you would ask for that. In Houston, if we're flying east to west or west to east through the corridor that you flew through, Jamie, you really do want to ask for VFR flight following. And the base of the Class Bravo airspace over I-10 is 2,000 feet. And it's kind of hard to see with that graphic because it's kind of small, but the clearance that you're going to get is you are cleared into Class Bravo at or below 2,000 feet. Mm-hmm. So you might say, well, why are they clearing you into Class Bravo when Class Bravo starts at 2,000 feet? And they're saying you're cleared into Bravo at or below 2,000 feet. They're giving you a little bit of wiggle room in case you make a mistake, for one. But if you look at that chart closely, and again, it's hard to see because it is rather small. If you're going, let's say you're going from the west side of town and you're going to someplace sort of in the southeast part of town, and if you cut that corner a little bit just north of Hobby Airport, if you cut that corner and make a little bit of a southwesterly turn, you're actually in Class Bravo surface area. So they're kind of giving you a little bit of a get out of jail free card before you do anything to have to use it by saying cleared into Bravo at or below 2,000 feet. Oftentimes, obviously, you've told them, or you should have told them where you're going, and they will oftentimes tell you you can expect to turn to the south in 5 miles or something like that. So basically what they're telling you is don't turn to the south yet. But that's the reason they'll say at or below 2,000 feet. Depending on the flow into both airports, they might give you 2,500 or even 3,000, but that's kind of rare.
Let's, Bernard C. has made an interesting comment, and this goes back to the transition routes, and he's saying, so unfamiliar doesn't work anymore? Well, that depends on where you are. That doesn't work in Southern California where K is. That may work in the Sanford Orlando transition route and the North Tampa transition route, where they may say, are you familiar with this transition route? If you say yes, they'll assign it. If you say no, they'll vector you. It's very much, these Bravo airspaces are very individualized. So you can't just randomly say, oh, they don't do that anymore. Because, well, maybe some of them do and maybe some of them don't. It's why clear, concise communication on the radio is so valuable. Remember, using the radio, it's just like ordering pizza. Who am I? Where am I? What do I want? Let go of the button and let somebody else talk. Let's go with
Jamie, really quick before you move on, with that unfamiliar, that is true with the transition routes. However, I want to encourage our viewers to, it's okay to say you're unfamiliar with a particular landmark. If a controller says, or particularly a tower controller says, make a right base at intersection of this freeway, and you don't know what that freeway is. And around here, there are lots of checkpoints that are actually not on the VFR sectionals, and that can get a little annoying unless you're a local and you know those landmarks. And if you get something like that, then I encourage you to say unfamiliar, and then they will tell you to report base, mile out, or give you some other way of describing. So with the transition routes, yes, you need to be familiar, but with landmarks, if you don't know exactly where that landmark is that the controller is talking about, make sure you tell them that you're not familiar.
Yeah.
Outstanding. Now, we introduced a new topic on the last episode, number 26, called Stump the Ambassador. It's a very critical game. I would like to say that if somebody can stump us, and it is theoretically possible that somebody could, but if somebody stumps us, make sure you include your mailing address on that email you send to ambassadors@aopa.org with your question. And if you stump us, if we do not have a plausible answer, if we just can't come up with something, we might send some swag to your mailbox. This week, we've got Mike. And Mike has written in a question, and this is condensed version, but basically Mark is asking, when you buy an airplane, how do deposits work? And he went on to talk about escrow, and does the deposit get returned, and blah, 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 blah. A lot of thoughts. I mean, when you're buying an airplane, most people have never done that. Can we agree with that? Most people have never bought an airplane? Pat, Kay? I mean, we all have, but most people. Do you mind if I take this one? Just because I've just been through this process again. Whatever the buyer and seller agree to is acceptable, Mike. If the deposit is a requirement from the seller's point of view, then you have to do it. But the FAA doesn't care. How you make this deal is none of their business. They want to see your registration application and your bill of sale. That's it. 2 forms. They're not interested in any other facet of this. Your bank, if you're financing it, they may require escrow or a down payment to be put in one. The big thing is you're going to want to do a pre-buy inspection, and a good pre-buy inspection, and that is the buyer's expense most of the time. That's your due diligence. But to directly answer your question, there is no standard way of doing it with a percentage of a deposit. Does it go into escrow or not? Just whatever you and the seller can agree to is acceptable. Do I have a thumbs up or down on that from my peers? What are we thinking? And I think everybody here has bought an airplane in the last year or two. So there.
Good job.
Well, thanks a lot, y'all. We've only got about 3 minutes left. And this actually has been a really interesting topic. And I'm glad we've covered non-towered airport operations, towered airport operations, Bravo airspace. And by the way, Charlie's not that different. Magenta lines instead of blue. You don't need the clearance, but it's basically the same thing. They're all just controlled airspace. Pat, do you have any parting words of wisdom? Because again, between the two of us, you're the smart one. Any parting words you'd like to share with the audience and just say, that really cements in that Pat Brown is the king of all DPEs?
Well, for all the compliments you've been feeding my way, I'll send you your $20 tomorrow. There was a question here, what's the minimum requirement for a student to get Class Bravo endorsement? And there is no minimum requirement per se, other than that you get together with a flight instructor, receive whatever instruction as is required, to the point where the instructor is confident that you're not going to go screw something up and sully his or her good name. Then go for it. So no, just don't be afraid. Class Bravo is nothing to be afraid of. Just get a little bit of instruction. If you're not sure, don't be afraid to tell folks that, hey, I don't know, I want to learn, and they will help you out. So there you go.
Kay, what do you have to share with our audience as we depart today? Beyond the fact that you very much want them to share the link from Facebook or YouTube to this program so all their friends know how they're spending their second and fourth Tuesday of the month.
Yes, thank you for plugging that in. I just want to say that people used to call Class Bravo as Boeing country. It's not Boeing country. It's available to all of us at GA, and it's just a matter of getting comfortable and taking a look at your TAC chart, your terminal area chart, getting familiar with the procedures, talking to local pilots. And then if it's your first time in that airspace, yes, go fly with the CFI, but it is not Boeing country. And so I encourage you to go out, especially if you're here in my neck of the woods. There are some wonderful airports that you're going to miss out on if you just try to avoid the Bravo, but instead embrace it, and you will really get a hang of it pretty quickly.
Yeah, I've been flying in Central Florida for better than 30 years. I love it here. I'm very comfortable with it. Even violating Tampa's Bravo airspace, nobody shoots at me. I'm in pretty good shape. But when I go to Houston, I brief with Pat on how to fly through that airspace, and we flew together, went out to lunch, because I like to eat. And you learn the area and the tricks. And I'll tell you, next time I'm out in the San Diego area, you can bet I'm going to be hassling Kay to take me up and show me the ropes and how it works here. And hey, they fly to Sun and Fun in Central Florida, so I'm happy to share information with them. Don't be afraid to tell people you need some help. Don't be afraid to say, I've never flown through this airspace or on this route or over this area while there's a nearby restricted area that's gone hot. It's perfectly okay. We do it with each other. We do it with our fellow pilots. We'll do it with you too. Folks, thanks so much for coming. I'm not kidding. I need you to share the link with all your friends. And I assume at least 4 or 5 of you have 6 friends or more. So think of the math. It would be great. Share the link to the Facebook link you're watching this on or the YouTube link. We really do appreciate it. We'll be here on the 2nd and 4th Thursday of every month. Next time, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we're back on the 23rd, just before Thanksgiving. Think of it as pre-eating day exercise because you'll need that. Folks, thanks a lot. Pat, Kay, always a pleasure to spend time with you. And let's all give a little bit of applause for Donnie McKay in the background, who produces this show and makes us all look good. See you on the 23rd, y'all. Till then, take care. Fly safe.
Bye-bye.
Have a good evening.